Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so excited today to be talking about the fantastic new Netflix series, Queen Charlotte. We are joined today by director and executive producer Tom Verica, executive producer Betsy Beers, along with cast members India Amarteifio, Corey Mylchreest, Arsema Thomas, Golda Rosheuvel, Sam Clemmett, and Freddie Dennis. And Betsy, in starting with you, I wanted to talk a little bit about finding the tone and the voice of this particular show, because it has so much of the fabric that we've come to know from the world of Bridgerton that carries across and creates this really wonderful linear thread. And yet it also has such a distinct voice and tonality, particularly with the themes and topics that it's exploring in its own world. And so I was interested in the development stages, how you really found that mix of what felt right to carry across into the world of Queen Charlotte, and what you wanted to create as kind of new entities within the tone and the voice of the show.
Obviously, it's incredibly important to us that Queen Charlotte is part of the Bridgerton world. It is a prequel for the whole Bridgerton series. It's this incredible view and sort of window in on all these different aspects of the Bridgerton world that we're just not exposed to in Bridgerton. And in terms of how this whole thing began, Ted Sarandos came to Shonda at one point when Bridgerton was launched and it was being responded to so gigantically by people, and there was so much enthusiasm in the world for the character of Queen Charlotte. And he said, wouldn't it be great if we understood how this amazing character came to be, this gigantically important, impressive, funny, deep character who basically rules this world. Where did that come from? And I think it got Shonda's brain going in terms of, okay, so what did the world look like that the original Queen Charlotte started in? And that opened up this box of telling the story of how the ton, as we saw it in Bridgerton, was created. And I think that was very, very important to her to sort of set that table. And also just to understand essentially not only where Queen Charlotte came from, but the origin stories then of Lady Danbury, of Lady Violet Bridgerton, and actually, as importantly, Brimsley, who is, a character who we love and who we kind of take for granted in a weird way in Bridgerton. But one of the things I love about this series is that he's a character that all of a sudden comes to the fore of the storytelling in this show as well.
I love that so much. And Tom, I wanted to talk about the visual language and how you worked to really conceptualize the visual language of the show in a way that always kind of really services and enhances the story and the emotion that we're seeing on screen. For example, I love the way that it's almost like there's more opulence in some of the moments where we see Charlotte becoming more and more isolated from the fact that George is off in the other property on the grounds and she's not seeing him. And it's like, but she's filled with all this incredible scenery around her. And it really just works to highlight the sense of isolation and loneliness. And so I was interested in how you worked to really craft a lot of visual language in that sort of manner.
Well, we were, again, blessed with a phenomenal script. I think we were given permission, in contrast to Bridgerton, being kind of Bridgerton adjacent. This really launches into Queen Charlotte and, what Golda has done with his role and kind of really blew the door wide open from Bridgerton. We see her in kind of a much more linear thing, I think, in the current day Bridgerton, with moments of diving into that. So we really dive deep into this character, both in present day Bridgerton and in the Georgian era with young Charlotte. So I think that personal journey really opened up the visual language as to, one of my favorite images just in seeing the pilot again last night is India as young Charlotte is alone in the bed and really kind of I remember just keep pushing, telling our DP, let's go. I want to go back further. I want to really feel her loneliness in this huge castle. There's so many scenes that are so rich with what each of these characters are going through. And that's ultimately has to drive the visual. You can't force it. I find myself getting removed when someone's forcing style, if the story isn't supporting it. So I think that coupled with the ridiculous locations that we have in England, in these trust houses, and particular in Blenheim Palace, which was really part of what this series was, which we never had in Bridgerton, really became the rock bed of not only the two different worlds of what we played as Buckingham House, and then as Kew Gardens in another trust house that we filmed at. So those really gave us permission to do that. And then again, the psychology of what each of these characters are going through enabled us to really play and what George is going through as well, that we really were able to sort of take some license with that because the script supported that.
That's really wonderful. And India, and coming over to you, what's so beautiful about watching the version of Charlotte that you've created is it has ties to Golda's interpretation of the character, but yet it's a different version. She's able to be more outward, more external, more reactive, because she's new, coming into a world of being so heavily observed and watched by everyone around her, and she's going through such a journey of self-discovery and finding herself. And I've heard you say that you found her to be an incredibly expressive character, but also one that really carries through on a lot of her actions. And so I was interested in how you really worked to find this very specific place for your interpretation of her at that particular age and that point in her life that's so externally expressive, and then how that really influenced a lot of the actions and motion that then came into play in your performance as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with just her age. She's 17, so at 17 we're all lost. We're all trying to discover who we are. That was kind of the foundations or the baseline of creating her, was just a young woman trying to navigate her way, not just through life, but then, this added pressure of society and a new society, a new social status, and moving incredibly high up, the class mobility that she kind of has to jump to is moving mountains almost. On top of that, it's just like layering this person and is really, is great in creating characters, having these layers. But then on top of that, you've then got the fact that she's joining the monarchy, then the fact that she's coming into a society that doesn't see her as an equal, even though she herself also doesn't see herself as an equal. So there's just a multitude of different experiences she's going through at the same time, alongside just growing up, which has been an absolute joy to be able to play. I think a lot of times leading characters can be quite monolithic and very kind of straight, because they drive the narrative and the characters around them, and the kind of ensemble around them they kind of chime in and give them the color almost, and create the vibrancy and they bulk up the story. But what's really great with Charlotte, and I think also for Corey as well, leading man in this, is that the characters are so complex, and they themselves have such a journey that we see them go through. It's been incredible, and it's only been able to be done with such an amazing cast and crew, and having Golda kind of forefront this all as well has been just incredibly instrumental in being able to do my job.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. There's so much complexity in all of the characters, and for you, Corey, in that regard as well, there's so many different layers that you've had to really think about in terms of how you've stepped into playing George. There's what does it look like when he is at different spaces and different levels of lucidity, and how that informs your performance. And then there's the emotional impact of the mental side of everything that he's going through. And then the physical elements, like when he's got tremors, or when it's just the stress of everything folding in on him and it feels like the entire world is closing in on him. And so I was interested in how you really worked to figure out the different elements of, his struggles with lucidity, the emotional impact that has, and then how that expresses itself physically, because it's really this kind of triple pronged approach that you've had to create.
What a question. Actually, so much of it is being in the very capable hands of Tom and actually because most of those scenes happen actually with either India or Freddie, and being in their hands, because all of those moments are unique and different, and it depends so much on what Tom has just told me, or what India has just said, or a look on Freddie's face, you know. In terms of the lucidity, the only way that you can do that is by, you know, in the moments where George is not lucid, unless he's bridging that gap, he's just about to step into that world, he is not aware that he's not lucid, and so it's an absolute truth to him. So it's very simple, really. You just completely 110% commit to that reality, and then coming out of it, there's a wealth of shame, and self-hatred and embarrassment, and sometimes denial with Charlotte, and that's a pretty universal experience. I think we've all hated ourselves, we've all felt shame, you know, so that's quite an easy thing to understand, and then to play into George. And in terms of the tremors, understanding where they came from, for me, that was like, you know, here's a man who, since his childhood, I mean, he's been abused by his grandfather. He's had to be silenced, basically, you know, and voiceless for decades, and he has all of this unexpressed pain. And it, you know, with all of us, you know, like, our bodies keep the score. It has to come out somewhere, and if that turns up in a moment of anxiety and panic, and it starts in the hand, or it starts in the neck, but that's often the beginning of a bridge to not being so lucid. And so it never felt like here's three things and let me hit, you know, it felt very much like you know, like a Pollock painting, and then Tom could help me be specific, and so could the cast, because it was all about them in that moment, unless it was all about the truth of the image that George is seeing.
Yeah, that's really, really wonderful. And Golda, and coming over to you, I love the experience of getting to watch this exploration of a character that we've gotten to know certain aspects of, but getting to see so many more of the private moments and who she is behind closed doors, who she is with her children, and all of those aspects. And I was really fascinated in the journey for you as a performer in that unique space of taking a character that you've developed so fully, that you've built so many rich details into over 2 seasons, and then almost going through this journey of rediscovery where suddenly you have these scripts that give you so many more elements of backstory, where I imagine some of them lined up with things that you had created for yourself, and some of them might have been a little bit different of what you'd imagined for aspects of her past as well at the same time, and just really kind of rediscovering and finding so many more layers and textures to a character that you already have such an intimate relationship with from the time that you've spent with her already.
Yeah. It was an extraordinary experience, because in Bridgerton there's a lot of imagination that I have to do. There's a lot of kind of backstory that I have to do. You know, there's layers of thinking about George in certain scenes, and I make kind of sure that aspect, that layer, is there all the time in Bridgerton. Going into Queen Charlotte, having 13 children physically in front of you, you know, the physical informs the imagination. And at the time, I was filming Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte at the same time. So it was this amazing, extraordinary journey of discovering one thing that then I could take into the other thing, and leaving one thing behind because it didn't help me into the other thing. So there was this real dance that I was having to do. You know, literally Tuesday I would be filming Bridgerton, and Wednesday I would be in Queen Charlotte. And the kind of layers, like, I kind of describe it as a kind of Knickerbocker glory. Do you know what I mean? Those kind of layers of strawberry and fruit, and then cream and biscuit, and it was just topping this beautiful, gorgeous dessert that in the end was, you know, just quite exhausting sometimes, but really thrilling. You know, we've started Queen Charlotte, I think, in Blenheim, and in March last year, and I finished Bridgerton in Blenheim March this year. So it was just like a whole beautiful roller coaster of discovering this character again and again and again and again. And the writing, lent itself to that quite extraordinarily.
I love that. And Arsema, in talking about your iteration of Lady Danbury in her earlier years, what I love is that there's this real foundation of who we see in her as a character in the early episodes. And then after the passing of her husband, that sense of, well, who am I if I'm breathing my own air, if I'm choosing what book I'm going to read? And just that sense of awakening that she starts describing and really looking for and thriving upon. And so how did you set about finding the initial foundation of who you thought she was, and then looking at, if all of a sudden all of these things which have been pushed upon her for so much of her life are suddenly stripped away, who does she then become in that space, and what does that journey look like?
So I think, gosh, the script, can we say it one more time for the people in the back? The script does so much amazing work. Our director does an amazing job in helping us stay present. But I think what I personally tried to kind of hone in on was, what is it like to be in this situation where you're essentially imprisoned and not be angry about it, not be bitter, not want to constantly smack your husband across the face when he says something foolish. And it made me realize that I had to do a lot of interviewing. So I talked with my mother. I talked with my mother, who then told me that my grandmother had been in an arranged marriage when she was 7 years old, and she ran away. And then she was in another arranged marriage when she was 13 years old. And that marriage is with my grandfather. And so to be able to talk to her about what that was like, because we talk about this idea of duty, and it's so difficult because in this day and age, it's not as necessary. We are able to kind of choose for ourselves what we want. And so what does it mean to get into the headspace of somebody who has never, ever been able to do that? That's not even a option in her mind. And it took, garnering empathy for my grandmother's situation, understanding what it's like to just kind of keep it pushing, be happy, and to make do with what you have. And then to be able to kind of crack her open and allow her to have the freedom of choice, it felt like I was cosmically giving this gift back to my grandmother that she couldn't have, and to my mother that she couldn't have. And so it felt freeing, not only as an actor to kind of be able to say what your character has been thinking, but then also on a personal level to kind of just let the waterfall just flow of, being able to say these very cutting things to, to the dowager princess, to be able to, hold the queen accountable for her actions. I think there is, I was just blessed to be able to have balance in this character. I think knowing that she would have that beautiful moment of freedom made me savor the moments of imprisonment a bit more, and to kind of, not take them for granted as much, if that makes sense.
It does. And Sam, and coming over to you and talking about Brimsley, it's interesting to watch him in this space of who he wants to be for Charlotte and the line to which he can be that person for Charlotte. I think one of the most beautiful moments to watch is when she's crying in front of him with her back on him, and your hand is just kind of reached out, but he can't physically touch her because that would be going beyond his station and position. And there's so many moments of that with him not being able to say or do the thing that he wants to do for her. And so it's kind of this cross section of who he is and how much of himself he can actually show at any time as well. And so how did you work to kind of think, well, who is Brimsley in his fullest self? And then who does he have to be when he's in these spaces? Because that's so much of his day-to-day in his world.
Yeah, it was a constant line we were sort of having to tread. And I would always ask Tom on set, when can we push these boundaries? When can we try and have a little bit more of who the more personal side to Brimsley with Queen Charlotte? And I think talking about that moment in the corridor when she falters and is upset and he puts his hand out, I think that moment is the foundation of who they are and who they become, particularly in the versions of the older Queen and the old Brimsley. But I think for seeing the more personal side of him, that absolutely the truth of that lives within his moments with Reynolds. You know, the emotional support system that relationship provides both of them is so vital to I mean, I think their mental health. They're two very young men that live very isolated lives. You know, their duty is, and their prerogative in life is to serve the king and to serve the queen. And that's kind of all they've got other than each other. So I think trying to find more of the humanity of him, the personal side to him and who he is, lives in the moments with Freddie or with Reynolds. And like I said, we would always, in the scenes with the Queen, try and push the boundaries of, okay, when can we see a slightly more personal side to him? How bold can he be in this moment to try and support her? You know, he has been given this opportunity that he's been waiting for all his life to serve a king or a queen. He knows the job inside out, and all of a sudden he has this young woman that's being married off to the King of England, and understandably doesn't really know how to hold herself in this position. So he has to maneuver everything he knows to serve her the best way he can. And I think that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the job, without a doubt, is finding the moments of the more human side to him with her, because it's very, very bold for him in their moments. Yeah.
And speaking of Reynolds, with you, Freddie, there's such a sweet protectiveness that he has over George. But I feel like there's also such an opportunity in the way that you've played him to see the weight of what it means to hold so much inside of himself in doing so. And even just the fact that in his relationship with Brimsley, he doesn't even reveal secrets to him in his most private moments. He really still holds on to so much. And so for you, how did you find that balance and that space of what does it look like to be so protective and so in service of someone, and to have to hold so many elements of everything that's happening throughout your day, and this dynamic and this relationship and friendship that builds between them within yourself, and not have anyone that you can share it with, even with your partner?
Well, yeah, I think that conflict that you've just laid out was my favorite element of Reynolds's arc, because you know, he loves both George in very different ways, but he loves George and Brimsley sort of, I would say, almost equal amounts. And that he faces that dilemma of, I think the way I tried to play it, at least, was that he desperately wanted, and in many ways needed, to share you know, to share his issues with Brimsley. He needed a shoulder to cry on, as such. But such was his loyalty to George that he couldn't do that. In my mind, George and Reynolds are, you know, of course, Reynolds is the king's man, but they are best friends. They have grown up together, and there is a sort of an unspoken bond. They understand each other better than I think anyone else does, in my mind. But Reynolds has also fallen deeply in love with Brimsley, and therefore not. I think for a lot of the series, he is desperate to share that information with Brimsley, and the moment that he sort of finally does, I think things all fall into place for Reynolds, and then that affords those opportunities as an actor to be more human and more vulnerable, which I think we see later on in the series. But yeah, that was absolutely my favorite element of playing Reynolds, was managing the conflicting love that he had for George and for Brimsley.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to watch. And Tom and Betsy, for the two of you, I wanted to ask you about the importance and the art of creating so much subtext in the world of a show like this. And, you know, in both Bridgerton and in this series, anytime there's a line of dialogue being spoken, there's an entirely different discussion that's happening underneath. And it's so part of what makes it so rich and so fascinating to watch whenever any characters are in discourse with each other. And so in terms of the development of a show like that and directing a show like that and really having to look at the breakdown of every scene in such a granular way, I was just interested in what some of the challenges are and how you both approach that.
Betsy, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, some of that obviously is, Tom directing, but I think what's amazing to me about this writing, because, I produced the show and I love it and I'm its big fan, but what's amazing to me about the writing is that both in Bridgerton and in this show is so much of the subtext is allowed because of the period that we're working in. So very often when you do a show nowadays, people are more likely to say what they think they mean and be incredibly honest about what they think they mean. But given that we're talking about, two different periods of England many years ago, and Sean and I've talked about this a lot, where essentially there are rules about everything. There are rules about everything. You have very little free will. And one of the things we've dug in a lot and we've been very interested in across the board here is the concept of how much free will you have, what you can express, what your duties and jobs are. And this whole sort of play between duty and sacrifice. And I think what's wonderful about the way that this is played and written, and Tom beautifully brings to screen with these incredible performers, is it's all about what's not being said. And very often it's all about what's not being said because you can't say it. So I think Brimsley and Reynolds are a beautiful example of they love each other and they have love and they find their agency in their love, but their duty keeps them from being able to truly be with somebody. Queen Charlotte, as you get to know her, you start to realize that she has to learn how to become this queen, and she has this duty that she has to this country, but it all stems out of the love that she has for this man, that she realizes in order to be with this man and stay with this man, she, as George says at one point, you get half a man, half a king. I think I'm probably quoting that and butchering it. I'm really sorry. But I think that the whole idea of it's the space between the lines, which is so beautifully played here, but also is so much what this show is about, which is all of those things clashing and bumping up against each other. And I think we watch it in a modern context and realize we're all still bound by so many of the same things. So that's a long-winded way of saying, from my point of view, what they all do so incredibly, what Shonda wrote so beautifully, was the space to feel, but not act. And I think what Tom brings to the forefront too, in terms of your work, Tom, is giving the actors the space to get to the place where they sometimes have to say the thing they don't want to say, or feel like they can't be in the position that they want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you hit it right on the head, Betsy. It's really that inner conflict of duty and personal. Going beyond that, you get it's Shonda's writing, which drives into what you think it's going, and then suddenly she flips it in a way that comes out in the dialogue. And if the actors commit to driving into that, it really pays off in a way that becomes hopefully unexpected and spontaneous. I think there's moments in this series, and it's because it was just such a overflowing gift from these actors right here that we explored and we played in some moments. There's 5 minutes of screen time with not a line of dialogue. And there's points of that we explored, and Shonda writes something like, the wedding ceremony, they exchange vows, we don't hear any of it, and says that, but then we kind of build on that. And I think my experience as an actor is really, I come in and I want to explore what is really happening on the foundation of these two people who are thrust together, who just had a real connection, and if suddenly in a very kind of public stage, exchanging vows in a way, and then you put in Chris Bowers with his music scoring, and you just fall. I mean, you fall, and you're just riveted by that. So my job is to sort of, in post, when we have all this beautiful performances, and Betsy, Sean, and I were all like, wow, I think we're so conditioned, like, this is really long, we got to trim this, and like, we don't want to trim any of this because it's all working. There's so much that these subtext that these actors bring in these moments, and finding and nuance, and it happens throughout at every episode. There's a look, we have reactions on someone, and we're seeing them reacting to something, and it's just absolutely beautiful to see that fulfillment come through and what's happening behind the eyes of what that particular character is going through and what it means to them.
Oh, and I mean, just to speak to what you said, Tom, the hardest thing, we're not shy about keeping things intact when we think they work. And, I think we have long episodes traditionally of things, and people are like, oh, your episodes seem longer. There's a reason for that, because it's something like, as you stated, Tom, and like a couple of these sequences, which, I mean, everything's so beautifully directed, but there are a couple of these sequences where logically and rationally you'd say, nothing's really happening, but everything's happening. Like every single thing is happening. And I don't know, it's you mentioned Chris Bowers too, but I think one of the processes, and like we've worked with Chris now on 3 shows, I think, what is it, Tom? 3 or 4,
at
3
least
shows.
3 or 4.
And the sound, I mean, the ability he has to capture, and you figure he does the score of Bridgerton, so there's a familial connection. You can see the sort of thread. There's never a feeling that this is an entirely isolated show. It's a show that emerged as, a pre-story for something that existed, but he speaks in themes and in character, and in creating a world that not only, I think, plays the characters' points of view, but also plays the circumstance. And there are these little hints in his music of where some of these people come from and how they have had to sort of suppress that at points. And then over the course of the episodes, you start to hear more of that theme come out. So it's a little like shout out to say, we have all of this with amazing editors, and then this incredible icing on the cake. Of course, the Black Queens are performing as well throughout. But this incredible work by Chris Bowers, who's just, who introduced me to Chevalier. I didn't know who Chevalier was, and he came and he said, there is this composer. And we'd sort of done a deep dive on, there are all these unacknowledged composers, Black composers during this period of time. Now I'm just tapping because I start to get pissed. And but the great thing about when people are undiscovered is when you discover them, it's so amazing. I'll shut up.
No, I love all of those rich details, and off the back of what Betsy was describing in that space of always kind of existing between duty and the personal for any of the cast that want to jump in on this. I just wanted to ask about the experience of the richness that you really find in having a space where there's so much on the page, and then there's so much richness to the layers and the subtext of everything that you're given on the page as well, to really play around with and discover and break down for yourselves as you're looking at your character in every individual scene.
Well, I think, that kind of, I can speak to the moments of silence, definitely for Brimsley and the Queen, especially in Bridgerton, where Brimsley doesn't really say much, but Hugh and I definitely worked on the relationship that we have that is unspoken in those moments. So, you may not see it on screen, but I will look at him at a certain time and we will have a dialogue together. And it just enriched for us our journey through Bridgerton. It is wonderful in Queen Charlotte to now have the voice of Brimsley in there, and for us to really show that intimate, dedicated friendship, lifelong friendship that we've had, that, the fans can kind of go, oh, that's what's going on. That's who they are. So yeah, the silence for us as 2 characters is really important, and it's so loaded. You may not see it, but it's so loaded for us to drive that storytelling.
I love that. And then lastly, India, Corey, and Golda, I wanted to ask you just about filming those final moments at the end of the last episode, because it's so stunningly performed. And again, it is those moments where it's just the 2 of them laying under the bed, and even in the moments where there's no words being exchanged, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and yet you see and feel all of the love between the 2 of them. And so I just wanted to ask about the experience of really finding so much of the emotion, because even when you look at your performances, they're so still and so contained in terms of the physical space, and yet it's the most emotionally combustive moment of the entire series.
Yeah, it was as an actor to be on that set and to see Golda and James Fleet, who plays older King George, or Regency era King George, should I say, to see kind of the transition from where myself and Corey had created this connection, and then to see it kind of happening years on was so otherworldly and completely out of body. Not only were we watching them, like, you know, and looking at their craft and them as actors and how they have turned this script and their own ideas about how it should be, you know, performed basically at the end, was so loaded with time and history and consideration that our, you know, I could go like this because I'm like, Corey's to my left right here, but people probably won't be able to see that. But our Queen George, Queen George, wow, King
Yes.
there we go. That
Queen
should be
George, yeah, Queen George and King
I
Charlotte.
love it. There you go. We finally figured that out.
Yeah.
that's what we were missing. But yeah, it was just beautiful. And it made me kind of go, okay, I feel like we've done a good job in giving these characters their foundations. And it was very all encompassing. And yeah, watching it as well back was the moment where I was like, oh guys, you got me. I was a bit of a wreck. But I think it was also a lot of nostalgia for the show, and just filming it and thinking back to what a wonderful time we had, and you know, sitting in these characters and really loving these people that we'd created. It was it's a very, very special scene for a lot of reasons.
It's all Tom Verica. It's all Tom Verica.
Oh,
Because
it was
that scene, if my memory serves me right, is a older Charlotte and George's scene, right?
Yeah.
And Tom was like, I'm gonna get India and Corey to learn that scene as well.
Yeah.
And it's his entire vision of bringing us four together to create that last moment. And it was so moving and so interesting and so full of play for the four of us. I mean, literally, James and I are under a bed, and then you get this little shout from the other room, get India, Golda, you come out, India, you go in. And like, you know, I'm shuffling out the bed, India's shuffling back in the bed. And then they do, you know, James and India are doing the scene together. And it was just really beautiful, amazing moment, I think, for all of us as actors, working with an incredible director who just has the most amazing, incredible mind and vision for this show, you know? And it was a true honor and privilege to film that.
I can just speak to that because it was, I mean, thank you, Golda, but it is the performance you brought, the world. Everything is on your shoulders. The journey that we've been following with young Charlotte, and as India said, seeing that and trying to bridge that was surreal, and it was magical. I think we all felt that in the moment. But I remember, you know, Shonda wrote in there that we see flashes of younger George and younger Charlotte.
Right, okay.
We weren't really quite. We kind of talked about what that meant and what that was. So that gave the spark. And then I pulled India and Corey aside and said, "Guys, I want you to learn this scene." I said, I'm going to have you do it together, but I also I'm going to interchange, and it might be weird. It might be kind of, you're subtly with the older version. I said, but it's really going to put us in the world of what each character is seeing in the other when they're saying particular lines. And some of them I knew that it wouldn't probably work and be right, but that continuity of having you be in there, the moments that land are frigging powerful. And it's a testament to you guys really kind of going along for that ride. And I think that sort of that leaping into that is really what gave that scene that is just absolutely powerful. And I remember my first watch in the editor's cut, and I was sitting in my office and I was destroyed. I was like, holy shit.
Oh, it's one of the most, I mean, people can tell you, like, I've seen a lot of stuff, and I'm not an easy crier, and every single time I watch that, which has been a lot, I cry because somehow or another, this entire journey is worth it. You
Yeah.
know, it's what you say with these incredible performances and the way you staged it is you get through it, and there's so much you take in over the course of the 6 episodes, and there's so much pain, and there's also joy and, you know, fun, but it's all worth it. And it makes it relatable because it's 2 people under a bed, you know. It's like, what could be simpler than that? But
That's
it's
Shonda Rhimes too. I mean, under a bed. It was
Yeah.
like it certainly posed technical challenges.
it
We're
turns
like,
out she
what?
can write.
How are we
I
gonna
know.
like these actors under a bed?
But the timing of it as well, I think, was really the filming of it was really interesting. I think if we'd filmed it right at the beginning, we wouldn't have all been at the same point in time. You know, I thought it was really great to have Corey and India have gone through that journey of filming these 2 characters to kind of come up to where James and I were at, you know what I mean? So the 4 of us were like completely together and locked into that scene because of the timing of actually filming it.
Well, and what I love that, you know, when Sean was talking about this, Betsy, you'll remember there was a lot of discussion about, is it going to be over? Are we going over 10 years? Is there going to be different Charlottes? And you really don't want that, because we said where we finished with young Charlotte and young George, they're setting out on their journey, and there is not much time. I mean, you know, where Golda's Charlotte is right now, that commitment is there. We see that commitment happen early on, and here they are, and it's like time has not moved at all, and that commitment, and obviously he's spiraled and spun into a much more difficult state, but that commitment to one another, and then when he opens back up again, they're right there, they're right where they were, and that's the beauty of the script.
I will say, like Betsy, I'm also not an easy cry, and it absolutely floored me and got me at the end of that moment. And the whole season is so stunning, and you've all done such incredible work on this. So congratulations, and thank you so much for talking about it and sharing all of this. Really appreciate your time today.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.